watching Stand By Me, I mean, it is a perfect movie. And like, it gets to the end and I just had tears in my eyes. Like, I couldn't believe it. I looked over at my son. He was like, yeah, that's good. I'm like, no, dude, that's great. You know?
Welcome to Story and Craft. Now, here's your host, Mark Preston.
All right, here we go. Another episode of Story and Craft. Welcome back. How are you? I'm Mark Preston. If this is your very first stop by the show, I want to welcome you. Thank you very much for just checking it out. Today, sitting down with Stuart Zicherman. Now, Stuart's an executive producer. He is a showrunner, writer, director. He's done a lot of projects over the years you may know of, like Elektra. Also did some writing on the show The Shrink Next Door with Paul Rudd and Will Ferrell. He also did The Americans on the FX network. The new project he's got out is called American Sports Story, about the football player Aaron Hernandez. It is currently on Hulu. Very talented guy when it comes to just the sheer breadth of work he's done. Like I said, he's producing, writing, directing. Very talented for sure. Now, if you would, do me a favor. I always ask this humble request is to pop on over to storyandcraftpod/rate. Do we say forward slash or just slash? Let me just do slash. Let's see how that sounds. storyandcraftpod.com/rate. Okay, that feels good. We'll do that. What you do there is just kind of hop on over to your favorite podcast app and rate the episode, rate the show, follow the show if you would. That way you get notified every time we have a new episode. And also leave a review if you would. Drop a little note. If you enjoyed the episode, just pop a note in there. It says, hey, cool stuff, a little emoji or whatever you want to do, whatever feels right for you. It's a little bit of love I appreciate and gives folks an opportunity to discover story and craft. Also, the website, as I mentioned, Story and Craft Pod. That's where you can find out everything about the show, who's been on, past guests, of course, past episodes, and you can also send me a note. You can drop me a line if you would like. Leave a voicemail. You can do that also. And just, it's a way for us to connect. All right, let's go and jump right into it. Today is Stuart Zicherman Day, right here on Story and Craft. Where are you joining me from today?
I'm in New York. I'm in Rye, New York.
Rye, New York. Where is that?
It's just outside the city.
I, Jewish kid from Dallas, and we had a couple good delis there. But now I'm living on an island in South Texas, and not a deli for, I think I'd have to drive to Austin to find a decent deli, So it's kind of my heart breaks a little bit. So I'm very envious that you got easy access to Katz's and all that kind of jazz. So I'm glad we had a chance to connect. I was taking a look and just kind of cursory, preparing, noticed the diversity of stuff you've done there doesn't seem to be a kind of a common thread between the type of genre. So you're not really kind of locked into doing documentary or action type stuff. So what was like kind of the beginning for you? Were you originally a writer? Or were you originally a screenplay writer? What was kind of the genesis to kind of got you where you are right now?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to be a writer. At the beginning of your career, you're just trying to find a way in, and I was, it's funny, I'd gone to film school at USC, grad school, and, it started to sort of get some writing under my belt, for school. But when I graduated from film school, I had no money and I really needed to figure out a way to go make some money. So I got a job as a PA on a movie in New York. Originally I actually got a job because I knew how to work a video camera. I had to work the video camera for the casting department. But it was this big casting director named John Lyons who had done a bunch of the Coen Brother movies. And I was just so excited to be in any room, getting paid to do anything, He was casting a new movie called City Hall. And it was Al Pacino, John Cusack, Bridget Fonda movie directed by Harold Becker. And so I'm in these casting sessions and Harold Becker is like sitting there, he's sitting right next to me. When the casting was over, he's like, you seem like a smart guy. You should be my assistant for the movie. So I ended up being his assistant on this gigantic, 100-day movie shoot in New York. And the best part of being on a film set like that is all the people you meet. I didn't even know what all people did in all the departments, and you just get to know people. And it turned out that, on the set of this movie over months and months, I got to know this guy who was one of the ADs, and he had written a movie, and he's like, "Oh, you went to film school? Would you read my movie?" And I was like, "Sure." And it was an action movie, and I was like, I gave him, the disclaimer: I went to film school. I'm not looking to write, action movies, but I'll give you notes. I was so arrogant, and anyway, so I read his script. He'd written it with this other guy.
Well, you got that arrogance of only a freshly minted film school student can have.
A complete bonehead, And but it turned out I gave these guys notes, and they really liked my notes, and they said, "Would you want to rewrite it, with us? And if we sell it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. We'll sell it." And, and it all seems so ridiculous. But I did. I would PA for 15 hours a day, and then at night I kind of rewrote their movie. It turned out that one of those guys knew a guy who worked at William Morris, and they sold the movie to Warner Brothers. And so I went from being a PA one day to being and it was an action movie. And so and that was the movie that, I made my first mark on. And so from that day forward, I was an action movie writer, without really, it was my way in. And that movie never got made, but from it, I got an agent and started writing, you're writing.
Well, that in and of itself was its own lesson. It always blows my mind whenever I'm speaking with folks, and I take a look sometimes at their, a quick glance at their IMDb is how many seemingly really cool projects just were either made and just never got released, or,
right.
How there's some stumble in the process. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I worked on action movies for the next 10 years, and I think 2 of them got made, and 1 of them I got credit on. But it was, at the time, it was a very funny, I think it's probably still this way, but, the action movie world was you pitch an idea, and you write a movie, and then you get rewritten, and maybe you get brought back, or you get hired on a different movie to rewrite. I worked on small piece of Rush Hour 2. I worked on I worked on all these different things, but it was a cool experience, and you really over time start to figure out what you really want to write.
When you decided to go off to film school, what was the original plan? Where you're like, okay, I'm going to be a writer director, I'm going to be an executive producer. What was there originally a plan as a freshman? What your game plan was?
Yeah, I mean, I'd gone to college. I was a classics major. I was an English major, and I loved drama, and I loved stories, and so when I applied to film school, my hope was just to sort of learn something about it. I didn't come from a family or a world where anybody had any connections to that world. I just loved movies and TV, and so my hope was just, I want to be a writer director. But what was great about, the graduate program at USC is they teach you everything. You learn about sound, you learn about cinematography, you learn about all the different elements of what it is to make a movie or a show. And, it was just for somebody who didn't know anything about it. It was just a great learning experience.
Well, you mentioned you were, nobody in your family was doing this. What were your folks up to? What was their vocation? I'm assuming, by the way, did you grow up in New York, or is that where you're originally from?
I grew up in Queens. Okay. Yeah. And my mom was a teacher on Long Island, a grade school teacher. And my dad worked as a stockbroker, and to their credit, they were always like, well, it's a business where 1 in a million make it. And they were, to their credit, they were always like, somebody's got to be the one, So I always believed
I like that. That's a rarity. Usually a parent, there's always that inclination to you don't want them to hurt themselves or go down a path that's going to be negative. Somebody's got to do that. Was my mentality when I got into doing stuff like this. It's like, well, somebody's got to do it, So no inclination to go into stock brokerage. I talk for a living. I know it's hard to believe. There was no inclination to do that at all.
No, I'm not. No, finance was not my jam. It's funny, for years, like you were saying before, especially in the movie business, you write movies and things don't get made. So for years, I was writing movies, making a living, and I don't think my dad worked in finance. He understood paychecks, I could never show anybody, nothing ever got made. So they were like, what are you really doing?
But you can say, stockbroker, you can say your job is very speculative as well, when you think about it.
Yeah, it is. It is.
So when you're growing up, though, of course, you want to go and you said you love movies. And were you like just movies in general, or did you really like going to the theater? Was the actual theatrical experience, was that like a big thing for you, or you just didn't care if, TV, theater didn't
No,
make a difference?
I loved going to the movies. I mean, I loved it. My parents were divorced and and I felt like everything I learned about, sounds cliche, but everything I learned about the world was, movies. I mean, I remember going to look at colleges, and I thought that colleges were like what everything looked like in Dead Poet Society, even though that was not even a college, it was a prep school. But,
Right.
so yeah, I mean, I loved going to the theater. I loved the movie experience. I remember, there's a lot of movies you can say to me, Empire Strikes Back or Princess Bride or, and I can tell you the theater I was at. I remember the experience.
The movies kind of became a timeline for you, like a little notches along the timeline where you can say, well, no, this movie came out, you knew what grade you were in, what you were doing. Or,
And it was such an event thing in your life. It's like you knew a movie was coming out Memorial Day weekend or summer. It was such a big part of because obviously we didn't have it in our homes yet. Yeah, I loved it.
Now, did you have any brothers or sisters? Were you an only kid?
I had a sister, and I have a sister, and she wasn't that into it. It was mainly like a thing I did with my friends, and I loved it. I loved storytelling, and I loved reading, and I just loved storytelling. And
it was funny what you mentioned about Dead Poet Society, because I thought, oh, that's cool, small. College in Northeast. And then I got a little older. It's like, well, Van Wilder, that seems like kind of a fun college experience also, What were those benchmark movies or theatrical experiences that you can call back on and go, okay, that was Mount Rushmore of movies that I just loved as a kid?
Well, I mean, there were a few. I mean, there was, I love The Princess Bride, but I really loved, this is obscure and weird. There was a movie in the 80s called The Killing Fields that I remember seeing.
It was like something about Cambodia or Vietnam, I think.
Cambodia. It was with the Khmer Rouge. And I just remember, it just was so transported to this other world, this whole story I didn't know anything about, and the sort of growing up a Jewish kid on Long Island, about the Holocaust, but you didn't know there was a massacre of millions of civilians in Cambodia. And movies just could take you to these other places and these other stories. And I remember, after seeing that movie, I started a food drive in my school for Cambodian refugees because I was so taken by the movie. I just remember, I saw it multiple times. I just there were movies like that just really captivated me, the drama of the storytelling.
But that's really, I guess, what kind of boils down to is the storytelling. When you realize it's not just, you were of a certain age where everybody's watching the action movies, the Die Hard or whatever. Yeah. Nothing against that great Christmas movie. But, when that was going on, then you look at the more serious, for lack of a better way of putting it. There are certain movies that kind of grab you. I remember when I was a kid, I think the movie The Right Stuff just kind of captivated me for some reason, just a different tonality, feeling. It was like, wait a minute, and I loved space stuff, so.
Yeah.
Now, we were talking the diversity of the things that you've definitely contributed to different types of stuff. But is there anything you like, we're moving in the documentary direction where you're like, okay, ultimately documentaries, that's the thing for me, that kind of storytelling? Or was it like dramas, or was there anything you were like, that's my jam?
It's funny. So I started out writing these action movies and there was a certain type of action movie that I loved from movies growing up. I loved those 70s thrillers like Marathon Man and Parallax View. And if I could write action movies set in that, in that tone, I was game to do that. But it's, it just wasn't like that. And every action movie I worked on, it felt like it was being built by blocks, and it just didn't feel that creative. And in between the paid jobs I had on action movies, I would try to write romantic comedies, or I would try to write little obscure movies that would be sort of, maybe a way for me to break out and do something different. But I remember I did rewrites on Rush Hour 2, the second of the Rush Hour movies. And they were shooting in Las Vegas. And I remember it was really the first time I worked on a big set with big stars. And I remember being on set in Las Vegas and just being in the middle of it, like, and Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker and were so funny in person, like, and they were so, and the improv and the way that they could just take like a couple of words that we wrote and turn them into something different. Like, I was like, I just wanted to find my way, and it felt so human. I just wanted to find my way into things that felt human, you know? And TV really gave me that opportunity because, you know, in movies, things just didn't get made. And when I got into TV, I actually got into TV initially through JJ Abrams. He produced my first pilot. And
which one was that?
It was a pilot called Pros and Cons. It didn't get picked up for series.
Oh, okay.
But it was like a con man kind of thing. And I remember like being on set. You know, when you're the writer of a TV show, they give you the keys to the kingdom. Like, you're on set. You're the one making everything, you know, kind of happen.
Yeah, that's the thing about TV that's different than movie. Movie's a director's medium, but it seems like TV's more of a writer's medium, you know, because you.
Oh, it's fully, yeah. No, it's, I mean, you're the writer is the showrunner and the showrunner is the boss, you know? And I couldn't believe it. You know, I couldn't believe that you're involved in casting and you're involved in you're staying there on set, and like they say cut, and the actors look to the monitors and the director turns around and looks at you and like, are we good? And you're like, we're good, you know? And like, I just, it was so, and so to me, I never wanted to be like, I was sort of pigeonholed and stuck in that action movie thing at the beginning of my career. I really, once I got into TV and was able to sort of write about people and write about, you know, human stories, whatever I did, I wanted to be writing about that, you know? And it didn't matter if it was like an hour long, you know, intense drama like The Americans or Lights Out or things like that, or like slightly more like, you know, lighter fare. Like this first show I did for JJ was a show called 6 Degrees. It was on ABC. You know, that had a big concept. It was about these people, and it didn't matter. Like, anywhere in my career I went, like, there are things I'm just interested in writing about. You know, family.
Well, JJ Abrams is kind of like big concept. You know, Lost. That's kind of an example. It's about real human experiences, kind of shot through the lens of this kind of sci-fi vibe. You know.
Yeah, he's the king of it. I mean, he's incredible at it. I mean, he really, you know. He really inspired me to, like, you could pitch and sell and write big ideas but approach them character first. And he was able to do that. You know, Alias and Lost and all those shows were just, you know, Felicity. Like, they were just all, his early TV shows were all like character first shows. And so I've been really lucky in my career. I mean, by not sort of sticking to one genre, I get invited to do different things, you know, and I've been lucky enough to work on, you know, half hours and comedies and things that have a lot more humor to them, and then really, really dark dramas and spy thrillers. And I've just been able to sort of move between all these different worlds, but with the sort of commonality of, like, at their core, they're about something very human.
Coming up with a story all on your own, or do you like the challenge, like when there is a existing story, existing script, and they talk about the script doctors, you know, for whatever reason it's just not gelling? Do you like to kind of come in there and kind of solve the puzzle? And do you prefer that, or do you prefer coming up with something organically from scratch, or is there even a preference?
It's not really a preference. They're two totally different things. You know, when you come into something that already exists, it's like it's easy to see it from the 10,000 foot view. You know, you can see where the problems are, and but it doesn't feel like yours. Mm-hmm. You know, so I mean, I do always like coming up with you know, my own stuff, or stuff that's inspired by something, or inspired by a piece of history, or a book, or an article, or a podcast. You know. Because then you can make those things your own, you know?
I play around with screenwriting. To me, it's kind of a cathartic. It's kind of fun. It's just to fart around, open up the software, and, you know, fart around is a professional term, by the way. I don't know if you learned at USC. Yeah. What is your favorite book on screenwriting? I think I've read, Save the Cat? I think I've read a couple, you know, but what is yours? Do you think that you mostly ascribe to? Is like, okay, that's kind of the process I'm using for the most part. Or is there one?
Well, there isn't really one. I mean, you know, the Sid Field book was sort of the one that everyone learned on, right? Like with the 3-act structure and all that. I always really loved reading anything by William Goldman, you know, and because he sort of espoused this thing that I've come to learn over the years, which is like, the 3-act structure is innate in any good story.
Mm-hmm.
I always say, like, you can sit at a dinner table, right, and watch someone tell a really interesting story who's not a good storyteller and be very bored by it. Or you can watch someone who's a great storyteller tell a not great story and just be completely enraptured by it. Because some people just have an understanding of, like, structure. They know how to hit the beats, and they know how to, when to move on and when to move on to the next thing and not to get stuck in something. And that's always, like, William Goldman just had an uncanny ability to do that.
When you're putting something together, when you're writing a screenplay, do you see in your mind's eye, are you seeing it play out? Do you see, in other words, like even the physicality of the actors or the seat, the set? Like whenever I write something, I always seem to be a little heavy on explaining this is what it's looking like. This is going to the aesthetic of it, if you will. Or do you just focus just on the words and the thought? I know it's a very general question, but I was just kind of curious.
No, it's a good question. It's actually. I'll answer that in 2 parts. One is the early part of my career. I did kind of what you were talking about. Is I would overwrite things. I over-describe things, right? I wanted the reader to really understand what I was talking about, right? But as I moved on in my career, you start making shows more. You start writing them to make them, right? You start writing them thinking you're going to make them. So it's like, it's about giving the essence of something. You're going to end up finding location. You're going to end up looking for locations. You're going to end up finding actors. So what I try to do now more is give the essence of what I'm trying to say versus be super specific about it. Because that essence, it's important. There's eventually going to be a director, and there's going to be a location manager who's reading this for locations, and there's going to be a production designer who's reading it to try to figure out, like, what the sets are going to look like. And, like, even if it's super specific in my words, they're going to make it their own anyway.
Right. There are a lot of chefs that ending up in the kitchen when a movie gets made. Yeah, or a TV show. Yeah. And there was something I read once, to never cast it as you're writing it. And to me, it's like that almost happens organically. Do you try to, like, when you're writing, do you have an actor in mind just as sort of a placeholder, for lack of a better way of putting it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I always end up with, like, sometimes if I'm writing for a specific actor, so that's different. But when I'm not writing for a specific actor, I get, like, an image of the character in my head. It may not be like an actual person, but it's sort of like it's this thing that I imagine in my head, and that's the character, that's their voice, and they're kind of like their shadow, What's funny is that every single time, I'm done with something and it's going to go into production and we go to casting. Like, the first week of casting is always just so painful because you have all these actors reading the words on tape or in front of you in casting, and you're like, it just doesn't sound anything like you imagined.
Yeah.
And then
or you see wild interpretations of it going in a lot of different directions.
Yeah. Then after about a week, you start seeing it in the way that they're doing it, not in the way that you remember doing it in your head for so long. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a process.
Yeah, I remember I was auditioning once. There was a callback I was with. It was for the TV show. Oh shit, I forgot. They shot it in New Orleans. Oh gosh, it was the guy that did The Wire. They did the show based in New Orleans. And I cannot. Treme. Why can't I can remember that? I lived down there for a long time. I was auditioning for Tim Robbins was directing that episode, and they had somebody from HBO, and they had the writer there. I was more nervous the fact the writer is sitting up there because those are his words he wrote. They're looking at me. I'm more concerned about the expressions on the writer's face. I'm delivering the lines, because this came from him.
I always say, like, what's amazing about the process, right, of writing shows or movies, it's like we writers, we start with a blank screen, right? It's just us. It's just me and it, right? And for the whole time I'm writing it, it's just the two of us. But what happens is, like, the second that you take it off your computer and start, like, you give it to a director, then it becomes the director is also. The director is going home at night and telling their husband or wife, right, my new show is this. Right. And then you start making it. Now there's a whole crew, and that crew is given up, 18 hours a day to work on the set. And they're going home and saying, my new show is, so by the time, like, you're done, the actors and the crew and everybody, there's 300 people who feel like it's their show. It's no longer just your show. And I love that. Like, I love that.
I was about to say, there's got to be such a source of pride that, you created literally something out of nothing, and now there's budgets behind it. Now there are people putting food on their table with it's one of those things I think writers, when you start looking at the order of the credits, me doing narration a lot. And whenever I see that the narrator on a documentary or a TV show comes as one of the last credits, I'm like, that should be the first, because that's who you're with the whole time. To me, I think the writer really, it's their baby, and everybody came after that. But that's just kind of my interpretation
I think
of, kind of like what you're saying.
I think it's true. And it is your baby, but it becomes a lot of other people's babies. And then eventually, which is always the hardest part, is, you give it out to the world, and then it becomes the world's show, or movie. And so in reality, it just isn't yours anymore. It was.
Yeah, I just think it's so funny that, you look at a film, and a lot of times you just, now, if you're in the industry and you're like, you probably know who the writer is, but usually it's the director or the big stars in it. And the writer doesn't always get referenced. I'm like, wait a minute, this thing didn't exist without them. That's they're kind of the quiet heroes, of Hollywood. Hey, it's Mark Preston, and I would like to tell you a little bit about one of our sponsors, X-Chair. Whether you're working from home or in the office, if you have a job or a task that has you sitting for a long period of time, this is the chair for you. Very comfortable, very customizable. They'll make it pretty much any way you want it. The look, the feel, the fabrics, everything. Plus, this is the kind of chair you can adjust to make it fit you just right. No matter your body type, it's spot on. I love my X-Chair. It has the Elemax cooling, heating, and massage technology. It is going to make your lower back feel so very good. Got to throw a little bit of love to X-Chair. It's the chair I'm sitting in every time I talk to a guest. So I've had a lot of time to have my tush in this chair, and the tush, the back, everybody's happy. Just go to storyandcraftpod.com/chair. Once again, X-Chair, check it out, storyandcraftpod.com/chair. Love my X-Chair. Your back will thank you. If you look at your projects you've done, is there anything you've done in particular that was close to you or close to a personal experience? Because you mentioned your parents are divorced, but I thought the movie Adult Child of Divorce was such a fun kind of concept.
Yeah.
But not just that. I just kind of saw that and I was like, well, I was wondering, is there anything that really kind of took a big chunk of your own personal life and you put that into the script? Was there anything you've ever done like that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously that movie, ACOD, was that was about my parents' divorce. I wanted to make something that was funny about divorce. I'd grown up on all these very, very serious divorce movies, and obviously divorce is a very serious subject.
Yeah, like Kramer versus Kramer. When I was a kid, I was like, wow, this is heavy, man.
Yeah, they tried to make some light out of it, and War of the Roses, and but there'd never really been like a divorce comedy per se. And my parents got divorced when I was a kid, and I thought it was, it was sad and hard, but there were also like moments of like insanity and levity. And so I just, I wanted to write something that my parents had, there was a funny situation in my parents' divorce that I thought could make for a good comedy. So I mean, that was a very personal story, poured a lot of my own life into that.
So was your dad? Was it Richard Jenkins?
Yeah, Richard Jenkins. Yeah.
Okay. Was the casting at all anywhere close to your real folks?
No. At a certain point, you don't want to offend your parents, so you don't want to get too close.
Yeah.
But it also was a case of again, like these things always. It's funny. I find even in the most personal things I've worked on, the things I care about the most, that feel closest to home, like they take on a life of their own. Yeah, no, Richard Jenkins and my dad have very little in common. But Richard Jenkins is a funny son of a gun,
He's done so many wonderful things, but when he played something about Mary, he was a therapist.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, for me, it was just so subtle, and it wasn't even a big part of the movie, but it was just so random. Yeah. But anyway, I'm sorry, I kind of miss those kind of comedies. But and talking about things that are close or personal, and then things that are scripted and things that come from somewhere internal. And here you are stepping into something with the American Sports Story. That's nothing that you created. That's real life. I mean, what was that turn? That had been kind of itching at you. Like, I want to do something with this story.
Well, I think the last bunch of years, I mean, everything I've worked on the last bunch of years has been based on some underlying material. I did Sweet Bitter, which was based on a book. The Shrink Next Door, which was based on a podcast. And then along came, the Aaron Hernandez story, which was based on the Spotlight team at the Boston Globe had this series of articles about the Hernandez story, which as a sports fan, I thought I really knew.
Wasn't there a movie called Spotlight?
Yeah.
So is that the same investigative team?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they did the priest story that the movie was made out of. And the Spotlight team is this constantly sort of like revolving group of reporters at the Globe that does like deep dives into different stories. And they did this deep dive into the Hernandez story, which I think a lot of people, including me, thought that they knew, right? Like I followed that story when it happened. I'm a big sports fan. I thought I knew the story. It turned out, the Spotlight team, wrote about a lot of elements of the story that really changed the narrative for me. And, when you ask about making it personal, I think like you have to find a way, as a writer, you have to find a way into anything that you write, any true story or anything that's based on someone else's story. You've got to find a way to personally find your, and this was a funny one for me, a really challenging one, because, it's about a murderer, but also like a world-class athlete with a drug addiction, who, is half Puerto Rican, half Italian, incredible athlete, exploring his sexuality. I am none of those things, including an athlete. But I did see in the story and when I did my deep dive into the material, I saw that there was like a really intense story about authenticity, about a person trying to find their authenticity and like figure out who they are and who they're going to be in the world. And that was something I could relate to. I thought other people could relate to. And that was my approach to the material.
Wasn't there talk with him that there was that he may have also had a CTE or brain injury that may have been, or am I imagining that? I'm trying to remember back.
That's a big part of the show. He when he died, he had the largest. He had the worst case of CTE ever diagnosed in someone his age.
Really?
They can only diagnose CTE after death. Unfortunately, after he committed suicide, they did an autopsy of his brain, and they discovered that he had very, very severe CTE.
That Will Smith movie he did, which it seems like there's still a discussion about it. In fact, speaking with my son about it a few months ago, and we're talking about that there is talk about, years down the road, will they be playing football the same way they are now?
Right.
You look at some of these athletes and you look at the way they're impaired later on, but you look at this guy who's really young.
Yeah.
Okay, then they're saying, okay, this actually starts in high school or even before that. It's not just being hit, but the quick stops.
Yeah.
And factoring all that in, did you feel like extra responsibility because of there are people still alive. There's family. There's people out there. And here you are telling a story. Was it did you feel extra pressure to kind of get this, for lack of a better way of putting it, there's no right or wrong, but, to get it right,
Yeah, no, I felt a ton of responsibility, and the biggest thing, most important thing to me was to never forgive Hernandez for what he did. We're making a show where we have to make this character likable, relatable. We have to sort of like explain kind of why we think he got to where, and did what he did. But I thought it was absolutely paramount that we never forgive him. We never let the audience forget that he ended people's lives and ruined families. And, my only thing is like, he wasn't born that way. He wasn't born a murderer. He became a murderer. And so I felt it incumbent upon us to show this journey and show, because I think that we sometimes live in a world where we get a little one note about things. He's a monster. Well, yeah, but he wasn't born a monster. He became a monster. And so like, let's look at why and how. And, and by the same token, you don't want to blame, all of it on any one thing. You don't want to say that he did it because of the CTE, because there are people who had CTE and did not commit murder.
Yeah, right.
So I think we just wanted to introduce all these elements, the drug use, the sexuality, the violence, the brain injury stuff, and leave it to the audience to sort of like, put it all together to understand that he lived a very complicated life, but again, never forgive him for what he did.
Being the showrunner as well, I mean, you really kind of taking on not just writing it, but you're also making, big decisions, was the casting, something that because, considering you're doing a biopic basically, and was the casting hard at all? Or did you like when you kind of landed on, the characters like, okay, that's the one. Just what was the casting process like for this?
The casting is really hard for something like this. I remember writing the pilot and thinking like, oh man, it's never going to get made. I'm never going to find a guy to play Aaron Hernandez, but we did. We found this incredible, guy who really, when you say we're making a biopic, we're interpreting the story. So we're not looking necessarily for somebody who looks exactly like him, but we're looking for somebody who can sort of like, inhabit the character and bring to life all the things in the scripts that we're writing. So, but it's a challenging world and challenging show because, you need a guy who, for Aaron in particular, you need a guy who is big and strong and tough and mean and scary, but also like this particular character was goofy and funny and silly. And, you're looking for somebody that can take all that on. By the same token, you're also casting a lot of well-known people. So it was tricky, like with Belichick, Urban Meyer, Rob Gronkowski, like all these people that we all know really, really well as sports fans. You don't want to do caricatures. That's my thing. It's like, again, we're trying to sort of like tell the story, but you don't want, I would tell the actors too, you don't want the actors to, I was like, don't, I told our Belichick actor, like, don't sit and watch hours and hours of Belichick and trying to imitate him. Like, make him your own. It was hard, but it was a hard challenge. It was really fun.
I spoke with James Comey, FBI director, and then Jeff Daniels, who's a phenomenal actor. And we were speaking, and he and Jeff Daniels did not have really any dialogue. I mean, Jeff kind of he kind of created on his own interpretation. And I think it's two routes you could go. I mean, one could almost come off as a caricature, and James Comey's like this 6'6", just ridiculously tall guy. And here's Jeff Daniels, physically they're not going to be the same, but it's the interpretation that makes it interesting, I think, nobody wants an imitation, But in doing this, did you have all the source material there, from the Boston Globe or did you go out and do some interviews and sit down with different people who were component parts of the story?
We didn't talk to anybody that was actually in the story. We did have all the Boston Globe stuff, the Spotlight team, particularly the reporters who had reported on the story were so giving with their time and their information. And they would come into the writer's room and they would answer questions for us. And that was great. And then at the same time, there were some things that we needed to learn more about. And we wanted to do it without necessarily reaching out to the real people in the story. So, like, for example, I really wanted to portray what it would be like, the sort of like toxicity of a male, like of a locker room at the time. The University of Florida locker room was known to be like, toxic, homophobic place, with a bunch of characters. And I'd never been in a college football locker room or a pro locker room. So we ended up bringing on a writer on the show who was a professional football player and aspiring writer. And he's been in locker rooms. Oh. So it's like, it's that kind of thing. Like you're just trying to gain experience of this world from other people in your writing staff.
It seems like a very pivotal piece of the story. You have one guy who's living his own truth internally, externally, whatever, and where that may not play very well in the machismo of the locker room. Yeah. Once this was released, did you get any feedback from anybody who was a part of the story who they're like, yeah, this was on point? Have you spoken with anybody who was part of the story subsequent to the release?
No, I mean, it's again, like, you're not going to get like, Tom Brady commenting on, I did have a cool moment. We were shooting some of the football down in Florida, and there was a guy who played. So we had all these former football players, and that were pretending to be our football players, and there was a guy who had played on the University of Florida team with Hernandez, named Chris Rainey, and he came over and introduced himself and told me about like what it was like to be in the locker room with him, and that was really cool. Just getting to talk to. I talked to a few reporters who were in the locker room with the Patriots and at that time, guys who covered Hernandez, and yeah, it's been nice to hear like if you watch the series 1 to 10, I think people are seeing the complexity and from the few people that, again, most of all, it's the Boston Globe reporters. They're the ones I really wanted to make proud. They feel like we've done a really good job at sort of like, portraying the complexity that was Hernandez's life in a way that may have been really real. You don't know when you go into a story like this, like sadly, Hernandez is gone. We can't reach out to him, and so much of everything that's ever been told about his story is speculative. No one really knows. It's been good feedback for us to hear back, like from people who are around him in that world and know the story, that our show feels like it's in the zone.
No pun intended, of course.
Yes.
No, so has this whetted your appetite at all for doing any other kind of projects like this? Taking not just athletes, but any other historical stories, figures, things like that, and turn those into, be it a television or film project? Or is this kind of like, okay, this is your foray into doing this, done?
No, I've always been really interested in true stories. And I've always been interested in sort of like even historical figures. I made a pilot about 10 years ago. That's still one of my favorite things I ever worked on. It didn't get picked up to series, but I made a pilot about Casanova, the real Casanova. I found this incredibly bizarre and interesting part of his life that I didn't know about, the people didn't know about, and wrote a show about that. I recently worked on a project about a referee, that got caught up in a gambling scandal. I worked on The Shrink Next Door, which was a true story. They're challenging, but I do enjoy bringing true stories to life.
Kind of next on your, I don't want to say next on your agenda, but what things are you kind of cooking up in the kitchen right now that you feel like, the next thing for you?
I am working on, I just wrote a legal show, my first ever legal show. I've never done that before. So I'm excited about that. Now, I'm working on a really cool show based on a book that a journalist wrote called Spooked, which is set in the world of private espionage, the corporate espionage.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah.
And set around,
especially in like the tech world, because you got to know a lot of that's going on.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, and it's interesting. The book is kind of like set in and around the 2016 election. It's funny you brought up James Comey, like he's in that story. Just all the sort of like private spies that were being hired to dig up and disseminate information around the 2016 election kind of started a new era of spying, where anyone, you don't have to be a spy to go into it. You could be a former journalist or a former anything. And it's kind of the Wild West now where, in a world where information is power, disseminating information is never, and creating the narrative has never been more important. So yeah, I'm doing a show actually with my old pal Matthew Reese from The Americans that's set in that world.
That's one show that is on my list. I call it my list. The things that, with a plethora of great stuff out there, I still haven't had a chance to watch a lot of stuff, but The Americans is on the list. Without a doubt. Oh, absolutely. I haven't watched Game of Thrones. I still, there's things I want to watch, but there's so, plus I will say I have three, well, two of them are teenagers anymore. Got 21, 20, and almost 19-year-old. Yeah. Our TV diet was based upon things like we power watched during COVID, Lost, things that my kids were really into. And it's kind of my time now. My kids are out; they're in college now. It's my time to catch up on things like The Americans. And but what are you watching right now? Who are the writers? And what are the projects right now that grab your attention? Who are you enjoying watching right now?
I'm really enjoying Disclaimer. I'm enjoying, like everybody else, I'm enjoying Nobody Wants This. I think it's great that the romantic comedy genre is coming back to TV. I'm also enjoying, I have a 12-year-old son, and I'm in the process of showing him all the movies that I've loved throughout my life, So I'm having the best time showing him. This weekend we watched Stand By Me.
Yeah, I said something the other day. It's like one of my kids is off the cuff just said, "Oh, Captain, my Captain." I was like, holy shit, they still haven't seen Dead Poets Society.
Right.
Got it. I mean, that's just like, you have to, School Ties. That's another one as a Jewish kid, that was such a, it kind of goes back to that thing when you were talking about what college, what you thought college would be, or like the private school, these, there's a library out there, and my kids are down for checking stuff out.
After you, after having spent the last 25 years writing movies and shows, and to go back and watch the things that inspired you, but you didn't know anything about the business, like watching Stand By Me, I mean, it's a flaw. I mean, as a writer, I can literally sit and watch it and say, that is a flawless script. It is a perfect movie. And like, it gets to the end, and I just had tears in my eyes. Like, I couldn't believe it. I looked over at my son. He was like, yeah, that's good. I'm like, no, dude. That's great.
And Reiner's ability to direct, to put that together with you think of all the genres that he's played with,
really
like romantic comedy.
Yeah.
Well, Tim, before we get going, I always kind of throw something out. I call my 7 questions. It's a little extra fun on the back end of a chat. Jewish kid, I got to ask this question. What is your favorite comfort food?
Favorite comfort food? It's not that unique. I love French fries. I will eat any kind of French fry. I love French fries, especially like diner French fries, like the really thick ones, like the the rectangular ones. Like any kind of a thick French fry, but not like the full potato cut French fry. That's overdoing it. But like the thick, like New York diner, Greek diner French fries. I've convinced myself that since potatoes are kind of vegetables, that it can't be that unhealthy, French fries.
You and I went to the same school. Yeah. Okay. There we go. I like that. I like that thought. But you're the second person that mentioned French fries. Yeah. Just I cannot remember who it was said it before. I'm like, when they're good, but when they're bad, when they're not good French fries, it's a whole different thing. It's like those floppy. Yeah. Next question. If you're going to sit down 3 people, talk story for a few hours, living or not, who would you like to sit down with? 3 people to have some coffee and just talk with.
Oh man, that's a great one. William Goldman for sure. I am a gigantic William Goldman fan. I would love to sit down like with one of the great beatnik musicians. I'd love to say Bob Dylan, but I think he would be kind of obscure and weird to talk to. So I'm going to say like someone like Phil Oakes, or someone, or even like a Harry Chapin, like someone like a great musical storyteller. I love music, and I love the way that stories are told through music. Yeah, and whoever kind of wrote the Bible, I don't know. But I've been going to Torah study recently. You'll appreciate this, and just the rabbi continues to like sort of like really, really hit hard the narrative of the Bible and how it like who it was written by, when it was written, and like I'm always like, it's just a great story. There's a lot of crazy storytelling in the Bible.
To be able to get in discussions with people about their interpretation, why they think it was, they kind of break it down almost not as much of as a theological, but more of a historical text. What did it say of the people of the time? Who, that does seem really intriguing to me.
I would just love to know, like, whoever wrote the Bible, like, did they know that this many people were going to like watch it?
This many stories and interpretations and and holidays. Now, if we're going to go back when you were a kid, watching movies, TV, who was your first celebrity crush as a kid?
I mean, celebrity crush. Well, I mean, I loved all the Charlie's Angels, all 3 of them, and I love them for different reasons. But I'd have to say Julie from The Love Boat was like she was my crush. She was so helpful. She always made people's problems go away.
Zipping around boat with a little clipboard, she always had something going.
She just always made people's problems go away. She never like complained, and she always like kind of stupid men running around her, and she just seemed to be in charge. And she was so pretty, and I just liked Julie. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
I'm there with you. We talked about music. Let's say you're going to be living on an exotic island, somewhere you really want to be. It's going to be a nice resort, but no streaming, no internet. So if you want to listen to some music, you're going to be there for a full year. You need to bring a DVD for a movie and a CD, an album. It can be a box set even, but that's all you have to listen to and watch. What would that DVD and what would that CD be for that full year on that island?
Well, I was thinking about this recently because I rewatched that two-part Scorsese documentary about Bob Dylan that had the two parts that were like, Dylan pre-electric and then Dylan post-electric, and I love it about the history of folk music, and then sort of like the way he hooked up with the band, and then had the tour of Europe, and just, all the relationships in the movie, and it's a great movie, like a great dramatic thrust, and also just the most incredible music. So that's a great one. I think it's called Don't Look Back, but that's a great one. I'm also really lately really falling back in love with Pink Floyd albums because they are just so rich, and I can listen to them over and over and constantly finding different things in them. Yeah.
You can get a good box set of them, Pink Floyd, and bring that with
Yeah.
you. Now, last couple questions here. If you were to say from the time you get up in the morning till the time you go to bed, the component parts of a perfect day for you, what would those component parts of a perfect day be to say this day was perfect for me?
Oh, man. Well, it would start with my kids, being really nice to me in the morning. It would start with some kind of exercise. I'd like to do a little bit of writing, but not that much, because 2 or 3 hours is usually my sweet spot. And then I'd like to spend the rest of the day fishing. I really like fishing.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I like fly fishing, and I like being on a river or a piece of water with my fly rod, maybe in a kayak. And yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, if somebody said, listen, you can't do this for a living, this is not something that's going to be able to put a roof over your head anymore, what would then be your next choice? What would you be doing besides this?
I would love to have studied or be studying anthropology, be teaching anthropology, or being out in the world doing whatever someone who is an anthropologist does, although I rarely see them do anything but teach. But I just love travel, and I love people and the study of people. And so I would love to be an anthropologist, whatever that is.
Yeah, to me, Anthony Bourdain was sort of a quasi-anthropologist.
Yeah.
Be able to travel and eat.
Yes.
That to me would be why does this culture do this? This completely submit to whatever culture you're in.
Right.
That would be
right. But I really I'm the opposite of whatever colonialist was. I love going places and sinking into the culture and whatever they do, and just pretending I'm not me. Yeah, I would love that. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, the last question I got for you, let's say you got that DeLorean. You can travel back to when you were 16 years old. You got a piece of advice to make in that moment you're in. Make that moment a little bit better, easier, whatever, or maybe put you on a little bit different path. What would that advice to 16-year-old you be?
Oh, man, just be patient. So much of growing up and being hungry for things and wanting to, I wanted to travel and meet people and learn things and go places and be a Hollywood writer. And I wanted to do so many things, and just slowing down to because once you start to do those things, right, you can't go back to not having them. And it's just the.
Well, isn't that part of our Jewish DNA where you kind of fuss over I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. Am I doing the thing? Am I doing, it's.
That's a better way to put it. It's there is no right thing. You're gonna go the wrong way. You're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna it's all part of the journey. Yeah, but I think that is just such an intrinsic part of youth.
Yeah, if you're afraid of messing up, you're not playing the game right. I think you gotta make mistakes, fall on your face, learn some things. Well, my friend, I really enjoyed the opportunity to sit down with you. It's such a pleasure. I appreciate you sharing your time with me. You're obviously a busy guy, and hopefully we'll have a chance to catch up down the line, my friend.
I really appreciate you having me. I really do.
All right, there you go. Stuart Zicherman, a talented guy making all kinds of TV, film, just a cool creative. It's kind of cool to sit down and talk to the folks who are behind the camera on the creative side. Now, I'm going to go ahead and jump on out of here because as I take a peek behind me, I'm seeing Ranger, our golden retriever puppy. I say puppy, he's like 8 months old now. Somebody's mowing the yard outside, and he is deeply intrigued and wants to go out and see what's up. So I'm going to take him out. But before I get going, I want to remind you, please go to storyandcraftpod.com/rate. Once again, storyandcraftpod.com/rate. Give you an opportunity to drop a little review, if you will, of the show. I greatly appreciate those. Drop some stars as well. I mean, stars are great. I mean, it's kind of podcaster fuel. You know, it's a way to kind of throw a little bit of love our way. Also, make sure to follow the show. You get notified every time there's a new episode if you follow. So please do if you would. Now I'm going to go jump on out of here, as I mentioned, because the pooch, well, it's patrol time. We got to get on out. Going to be back soon with another episode, so I'm going to talk to you then, and I want to thank you again for making what I got going on part of whatever you've got going on. So enjoy the rest of your day or evening or whatever you have going on. I'll catch you next time, right here on Story and Craft.
That's it for this episode of Story and Craft. Join Mark next week for more conversation, right here on Story and Craft. Story and Craft is a presentation of Mark Preston Productions, LLC. Executive producer is Mark Preston. Associate producer is Zachary Holden. Please rate and review Story and Craft on Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. You can subscribe to show updates and stay in the know. Just head to storyandcraftpod.com and sign up for the newsletter. I'm Emma Dillon. See you next time, and remember, keep telling your story. Come on.